This plant has sat in my collection for years, but now that I've owned it for a tiny bit of time, I'm here to tell you whether or not this plant is truly special or whether or not it's something that collectors just obsess about. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplanty Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. If you've never seen a Labisia Turtleback before, you can kind of probably now start to understand why so many people become obsessed with this plant. I mean, look at those leaves that almost look like they could be reptilian. Obviously, with the name Turtleback, you would understand why this plant might be of interest to a lot of people. But the real question isn't what this plant looks like in photos or even videos like this, it's about how it grows. So in this video, I'm going to dive into how I found growing this plant. Is there anything that frustrated me? Is there anything that surprised me? And ultimately help you maybe make the decision of, is this plant truly worth it for you? Okay, so some background on this plant. The people that have been on my channel for long enough will probably know quite how long this specific plant has been on my wish list. Yes, quite a few years at this point that I've been kind of eyeballing plants, specifically the turtleback, but in recent years I've also been opening up my horizon to other Labisias. But this was the one that originally caught my eye. And it was a plant that you couldn't find, at least here in the UK, and I would imagine Europe to some extent. You couldn't find this super easily into stores, but I'll deal with that a bit more in availability. But ultimately, I came across it probably close to a year now. The video will have how long I've had this. This is probably just up to a year or just shy of a year. So it's a good point for me to at least create the first touch point video on this plant. And this was at my local garden centre. Again, for the people that have been here for a while, they probably know and they're not surprised. And it was at a relatively decent price. I'll see if I can find a picture here of when I first got the plant. Apologies if it's a bit busted looking, but most of the pictures that I have when I first get the plants are just quick and dirty pictures that I snap so I can put it onto my plant care app so I can visually remember what it looks like. Not that I could probably forget what this looks like, but for all other plants, so those pictures aren't the most artistic, but you should be able to see what it looked like. And it was considerably smaller than the plant that I'm holding now. It had a lot less leaves, so we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 leaves. And now we're up to, there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 leaves altogether now. So not bad. But yeah, that was essentially how this plant both came to my awareness and ultimately joined my collection or my conservatory or my plant room, whatever you want to call it. So let's look at speed of growth for this plant. And I am not gonna dance around the subject that this plant isn't gonna be one of your fastest growers. Although I will quickly hasten to add that this plant is also not going to be your slowest grower. It's kind of in that middle ground, leaning more towards slow than fast. But again, I was surprised because everything I'd seen online and what I was experiencing, I'm just like, oh, this is a relatively slow growing plant. Now, the interesting thing that I will say about this is now that the summer is here, and we're kind of getting into the thick of it and it's super, super hot. So this video is being filmed at a obscenely early hour of the morning because otherwise it's too hot in here. But I am seeing a lot more fast growth with this plant. So let that be known. We all know for a lot of tropical plants, when you're looking at things like temperature, we all know that they kick it up a gear when it comes to the summer months and maybe slow down or barely do anything during the winter months. This still did things in the winter months. So let's benchmark that the way that I usually do with these sections. So versus a golden pothos in this space. So again, you need to remember I am growing this in my conservatory. The other thing that you probably need to be aware of in terms of my conservatory, and I'll touch on light in just a moment when it's the care and accessories, but it does have relatively decent humidity in here, so I'm usually at about 70 to 80% humidity. Truthfully, and I'd be curious to know if you own this plant and you're growing this in household conditions, I don't think this plant would necessarily struggle in household conditions as long as you have got the light and the light and the temperature right, probably as well, even more importantly, the watering. Because it does have relatively leathery leaves. These leaves are very, very leathery, and they're very textured as well. So they're not the usual kind of suspect of plants where you need high humidity because they've got velvety leaves. I tend to find that velvety leaf plants, especially the tropical plants, they tend to need the higher humidity levels. Things that are this kind of leathery usually are okay with household humidity, usually. I have not tried this, as I said, in regular household humidity. So if I'm benchmarking this against, going back to my original point, if I'm benchmarking this against the golden pothos in this space, so in the growing season, spring and summer, if a golden pothos is growing 2 to 3 leaves on each one of its growing stems, this would probably grow about a leaf or a leaf and a half, if that makes sense, so within a month. So you might start getting the beginnings of a second leaf within the second month, but it wouldn't be fully hardened at that point. Now, winter, conversely, if a golden pothos in this space will get 1 to 2 leaves in a month, this will maybe get 1 leaf every 2 to 3 months. So it still grows, it just doesn't grow as fast as it would do in the summer, as is evident. And I can actually tell you, since we started getting warmer days, this leaf, and this leaf have started since we started getting warmer days. So that should tell you something. Now, ease of propagation with this plant, again, I'm not going to lie and say that I've tried propagating it. I have not tried propagating this. If any of you have tried propagating this because you own this plant and you want to share your experiences down below, please do so. But looking at this, I can imagine there's a couple of things that are going to be challenging for this, especially if you want to propagate via cutting. Because, and I'll bring it in so you can kind of see, hopefully that's focusing into the middle of that plant, the internodal space, so the space between each of the nodes and the space between where each of the leaves attach to the main stem is very, 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 very tight. Very tight. So I would imagine the only way that you're realistically going to get a safe cutting is with like a blade of some variety, not scissors. Generally, I don't like to use scissors if I can avoid it, because they've got crushing motion. Something like a blade, like a fine blade, will do you much better with this. How easily it propagates and in what medium, I do not know. I would imagine this would be relatively straightforward-ish if you've got seeds, but I've never seen seeds for this plant ever come up. So truthfully, do not know how well it would propagate. I have not tried propagating it, again, because it's quite a small and juvenile plant still, even at this size. So the other thing that is worth noting here, at least from what I have seen from some of my earlier research when I first was getting this plant, was that when I've seen this growing a bit more maturely in nature, it tends to look a bit like a Dracaena. So the type of Dracaena where you lose all the bottom leaves and you end up with something that looks like a very long stem and palm leaves at the top. I have seen this do the same thing, which for me, I think is kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool. So I don't mind that. And I think at that point, it might be easier. I also don't know, I'll do some further research when editing this video, but I would imagine you should be able to propagate this via cutting. If there isn't a way of doing it via cutting because of the way that it grows, and if it grows more like a traditional trunk or a woodier stem, nothing has started to become woody yet, that might prove challenging. But as I said, the one thing I can probably say, if you can propagate it via cutting, is that it's going to be tricky because of that internodal spacing. If you've got other plants that have got tight internodal spacing, I'm thinking of the Philodendron bilietiae, very similar, very, very similar. So availability with this plant, and I touched on it briefly in the background section. this wasn't a plant that you could find. I mean, to this day, it's still not a plant that comes up, again, based where I am, so in the UK, and I would imagine Europe, this is not a plant that I see come up very, very frequently in shops or online either. So if you do want something like this and you find it, purchase it then. Don't wait for months down the road because you probably won't find it again if it sells out. Now, the flip side of that is, do I think that there is a huge demand for this plant? So you might be worried that if I leave it for a day or two, it's all going to sell out. Maybe when they first kind of became something that people were aware of in houseplants kind of collections and houseplant hobby, less so I would imagine now. I don't think there's a whole queue of people clambering outside of shops to go and buy this specific plant. So you're relatively safe in that respect. Now, I did touch a bit before on price. This was a plant that when it first came onto the market, at least in recent years, as we always know, things have been in the market before. Nothing is truly new, but recent years that it has come on the market, I don't think this ever really hit 3 figures. It was probably very high double digits. And because I knew that it was challenging and possibly, or at least that's what I'd heard, I was just like, oh, I don't know if I want to spend that kind of money, because if it turns to mush, that's a lot of money to spend on a plant that might turn to mush. Now, the reality was when I purchased this was at a much more reasonable price. I'll add it up the top here. I'll do the usual thing as well, where I'll have the Great British Pounds and the US dollars as well to give you all a bit of a benchmark. So yeah, it is a plant that has come down in price. Do I think this is, I don't know if anybody is ever interested still in kind of investment plants. I don't think this is an investment plant. It grows too slowly. I think part of the reason that the price has dropped, but it's never going to drop down to rock bottom prices, is because inherently it is on the slower side of growing. There's also not a huge demand of people out there, because if it grows super fast and there's a high demand of people, you can see the price drop really quickly because they can propagate it really super quickly to a point that is purchasable by all of us. If something grows slowly and there's not that many people that are looking for it, you know what, they can charge a bit more because they know that the people that are looking for it, A, will wait, and B, will likely pay a bit more for a plant like this. Do I think that the price that I paid for this was a fair price? Yes, at that particular moment in time, I do. If this falls down a bit lower, and I really do truly hope that this becomes even more affordable for people, then I see no hesitation in getting a plant like this and giving it a try yourself. Now, pests. Pests are a really interesting one with this because, I'm not going to lie, I have not had any pests on this. Nothing, not a single pest. And there's a tiny bit of like leaf damage that is happening on that leaf that you might be able to see there. There's a little hole. That's not a pest. I think that might even just be a bit of like sunburn, basically. But absolutely nothing. No mealybugs, no thrips, no spider mites, no nothing. Absolutely fine. I'm just checking the plant now just to see if I've missed anything. No. Also something that might be of interest to people. Should I mention trypophobia? I don't think it's that bad, but maybe. It is a plant that does have kind of reddish backs, and that will tell us something when we kind of look at accessories and care. But overall, and this has been around other plants that have got pests, and not a single thing. Not a single thing. So that might just be me and I was lucky. Again, if you know differently and you've grown this and it's been a pest magnet, let us all know down below. Let me know as well, because I need to keep an eye on it. But so far, absolutely fine. The other thing I will say, oh, interesting. You know, when you pick up a plant and you notice stuff now, let me see if I can bring it in so you might be able, if it will focus enough. I do try to film these days in 4K just so that some of these things do come up. I didn't realize in this heat it is getting extra floral nectaries. So you know that kind of sugary, watery substance that you get at the back of the leaves. Really, really quite cool. Did not realize it was doing it. But yeah, overall, for pests, not a single one. Now we come into accessories and care. So as I mentioned earlier on, red backs. What does that tell us, or at least what does that hint at? Correct. This plant is likely one that is very much at the lower kind of parts of any jungle or forest. It's an understory plant. And if I am not mistaken, this is not an aroid, I think at least. And it's definitely not an epiphyte. This, if I'm not mistaken, I will correct myself on this video. This is an epiphyte. This isn't an epiphyte, this is a terrestrial plant. So it grows in the ground rather than nooks and crannies of trees. Can some of these terrestrial plants still grow in deep enough nooks and crannies of trees? Possibly, because nature is weird and kooky and wild, but by and large, if a terrestrial plant is a terrestrial plant, it will grow in the ground. Couple of things that we need to remember with that, and I have done an entire video and I'll link it somewhere at the top there. Moisture levels need to be consistent if it's a terrestrial plant. Feeding becomes a lot more important because if you can imagine something that's epiphytic, they're waiting for leaf debris and things like that to fall within those nooks and crannies to get extra nutrients. Anything that's in the soil level, they're more used to having more of an abundance of nutrients around them within their soil. So remember that. Now, the interesting thing is in terms of how I'm growing this, you might be able to see I'm growing it in a clear plastic pot and it's got air holes. Do I think it needs it? Not necessarily, because it's not an epiphyte as I was talking about before, but I like to have most of my plants, even the ones that are not epiphytic, in clear pots so I can see the roots. It's annoying because I've only watered this yesterday, so you can't really see the roots, but I will tell you that the roots are very fine with this one. Not quite as fine as some begonias, but not far off. So that should tell you something in terms of the moisture needs that it needs, because essentially it's maintaining quite large leathery leaves. Granted, these aren't truly succulent, but they are kind of cardboardy leaves, so it is storing some water within its leaves. Now, what I am growing it in, even though it's got thin roots and even though I'm growing it in a clear pot with air holes, and I think I need to start saying this on some of my videos, is I am growing this in an anthurium soil mix. I think originally I had it in more of a houseplant soil mix, and since I've repotted it up one now, I've added an anthurium soil mix now. A bit of information, and as I said, I should have mentioned this earlier on, but my brain didn't twig that it needs to kind of be said. A lot of the times the soil media that we all choose to use, and that's why I'm saying not just with my videos, but everybody's videos, take it with a pinch of salt and look at the context around it. I use something as airy as this because my humidity levels in here are as high as they are. So I need to get as much air to it as possible because otherwise it gets quite boggy in this whole space, especially in the summer. So you might see people that are growing in greenhouses. If you find any videos online of like long-term houseplant collectors, especially ones that are growing in warmer climates that just are growing all of their houseplants in a shaded greenhouse, a lot of the times, especially the ones that are just spraying them down with water at least once a day for all of their plants, they have their plants in very, very chunky soil mixes because it then means that most plants can be in that soil mix without there being so much of a risk of root rot. This might be different if you are growing this in household conditions where the humidity levels aren't as high. You might want to try a slightly denser soil mix and just keep awareness of what is happening within the soil media. I will hearken to say that I have let this dry out almost entirely before I water it, and it has been absolutely fine. More so in the winter. In the summer now, I'm trying to not let it go bone dry because there's a high risk that, especially in this heat, that it will cause problems to the plant. Now, light is another big thing, I think, for this plant, and it's not one that a lot of people talk about because this is a plant that, at least in my experience, is probably closer to a true medium light towards medium bright indirect light. And I've just said a whole bunch of words that doesn't necessarily mean a whole bunch of things to people. I did do another video, hopefully I can find that video because I did do all the measurements there, and I will add the measurements here in terms of how I am growing it. So this is growing next to a window but slightly lower, so it's not getting that much light. It's growing close, probably about 1/2 meter away from an east-facing window, It's also got a neck curtain in front of it all the time, and this is sitting underneath but to the side of a Barina LED grow light. So it's on my lowest of shelves, and I wanted something that was more medium to lower light because of that, and it hasn't skipped a beat. I did show you before where it got slightly burnt, but that is the leaf that is the closest to the window rather than the grow light. I think the reality is this plant is getting more benefit from the grow light than it is necessarily from the window, especially during the winter months. But as long as you do these things, and it might sound like a lot, but the light, you're going to measure it and place it once, and as long as it's happy, you're fine. Feeding this, it's the same as I usually feed most of my plants, so weekly, so a very weak fertilizer solution in every time that I water it, even in the winter. Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Do I think it needs anything else? Truthfully, based on just my experience of growing this plant, not really. So into some final thoughts about this, a beautiful, beautiful plant. So I'll start my final thoughts as I usually do. So if I did not own this plant, but knowing what I know now after having owned it, if it came in front of me, would I purchase this? Hands down, yes. Hands down, yes. Because, and this is important to say, even though I gave you a long description on the accessories and care, this truly, for me, so far, has been a plug and play plant. The plug bit is a bit that's going to take a bit of time just to get all the conditions right for it. But as long as you've got that, and that could be true for most plants, but this one more specifically is kind of slowly falling into the category of my feral plant. And I know a few people on recent videos, when I relinked the feral plant video, were very excited to see them. I'll link the feral plant video on this as well in case you haven't seen that and you wanted to see it. But yeah, 100% would get it again. It was nowhere near as difficult as I thought it was going to be, and it has been an absolute joy to grow. Now, that might also clue you in terms of the score that I would give this plant. So 0, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, where would I score this plant? And I'll give you one score this time. I won't give you a me score and then what I think for everybody else. Truthfully, as long as you're into these textured leaves and you want something that looks a bit more interesting, this is really, I think, going to resonate with a lot of people that love the look of the Alocasia Dragon Scale or the Silver Alocasia Dragon Scale. This is very similar vibes, very similar vibes. I would give this a strong 9. 9 to an 8, depending on how challenging you want to be. Because interestingly enough, I've got this now years after owning a large collection of houseplants, and I might be going out on a limb to say that as long as I accidentally fell upon the care that I was just talking about now, or somebody like you that might be just starting off and you found this video and you want to try that care, if I accidentally fell upon that care, I probably could have grown this relatively successfully even earlier on in my kind of planty journey, as long as I kind of fell onto that exact care. But yeah, for me, this is a truly, truly beautiful plant. I do not regret getting it. I regret not getting it earlier because I would have had an even bigger specimen at this point. But as I said, I wasn't willing to give the money that they were asking for back then. More than happy with how much I paid for it now. And yeah, truly, truly awesome plant. So yes. Tell me what you think. If you've owned this plant and you want to share your experiences, as always, please do so in the comments down below. Or if you think that I've messed something up or you do things slightly differently and you want to share, please do so down below. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I'll see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.